This was shocking. A young woman, barely stepping into adulthood, forced into a marriage she never wanted. But this wasn't just any arranged marriage. Her own stepfather, someone meant to protect her, was the one who orchestrated it. And the reason, not love, not tradition, but something far more twisted. This is how a man manipulated, controlled, and trapped his stepdaughter in a horrifying fate that no one saw coming. Let me explain how this nightmare unfolded. She thought she had a normal life, a family that cared for her. But behind closed doors, she was nothing more than a pawn in a cruel game. The man who raised her, someone she should have been able to trust, saw her as a transaction, a way to fulfill his own hidden motives. What could push a stepfather to do something this disturbing? And why was the man she was forced to marry willing to go along with it? This case shook the legal system, raised disturbing questions about control, and left the world in disbelief. But what really happened, and how did it all come crashing down? Stay with me, because the truth behind this story is even darker than you can imagine. This case isn't just about a forced marriage. It's about power, control, and betrayal from the one person who was supposed to protect her. A young woman, barely out of her teenage years, was pressured, manipulated, and ultimately forced to marry a man she had never loved, never chosen, and never wanted. But why? What could drive a stepfather to hand over his own stepdaughter like she was property? And why did no one stop it? Let me explain how it happened. At first glance, her life seemed normal. She lived in what appeared to be a stable home, went to school like any other teenager, and had dreams of her own. But behind closed doors, things were far from normal. Her stepfather wasn't just strict, he was controlling, watching her every move, deciding who she could talk to, what she could wear, and most disturbingly, who she would marry. But this wasn't about love or family honor. It was something much worse. Reports later revealed that the marriage was arranged for reasons far more sinister. Some believe it was for financial gain. Others think it was about maintaining power over her. And some suspect there were even darker motives at play. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. She never had a choice. Her story is disturbing, but it's not unique. Forced marriages still happen across the world, even in places where people assume women have rights. But in this case, there was something even more shocking. A legal battle that exposed dark secrets, a stepfather whose true nature was far more twisted than anyone imagined, and a husband who might not have been as innocent as he seemed. So how did she escape? Did she escape? And what finally led to the truth being exposed? Stay with me, because this case is about to take a turn that no one saw coming. At first, it started with small things, strict rules, punishments for speaking out, and an overwhelming feeling that her life wasn't her own. She was told what to wear, who to speak to, and how to behave. But when she turned 18, things took a terrifying turn. Her stepfather, the man who had raised her since she was a little girl, suddenly became more possessive, more aggressive, and more controlling. This was no ordinary household. Reports suggest that she wasn't allowed to date, wasn't allowed to have male friends, and was constantly reminded that her future wasn't in her hands. If she dared to argue, she was met with threats, some verbal, some worse. And then, one day she was given the news that changed everything. She was going to be married, not by choice, not out of love, but because her stepfather had decided it for her. The man she was being forced to marry was older, someone she barely knew. The circumstances surrounding this arrangement were shady at best. Some sources claim money was involved, that there was a financial deal behind this forced union. Others believe it was about power. Her stepfather wanted control over her life, even after she left his house. And the racial dynamic added another layer to this horrifying situation. She wasn't given an option, no matter what she felt. She tried to resist. She begged her mother to intervene, but nothing worked. Her mother was either too scared, too manipulated, or too unwilling to go against the man who controlled their lives. Every door she tried to escape through was slammed shut. This was shocking. But let me explain how it got even worse. The wedding was planned quickly, almost as if they were trying to get it over with before anyone could stop it. Legal loopholes were exploited. Any objections she raised were ignored. And when the day finally came, she walked down the aisle, not as a bride, but as a prisoner. So why didn't she run? The truth is, she tried. But her stepfather made it clear. If she left, there would be consequences. And she knew exactly what he was capable of. But this was just the beginning. What happened after the wedding took this case from horrifying to something even more disturbing. The wedding wasn't a celebration, it was a transaction. Every moment felt forced, every vow a lie. She stood at the altar with empty eyes, surrounded by guests who either didn't know the truth or chose to ignore it. There was no love, no happiness, just a cold, suffocating reality. Her fate had been sealed. But how did this even happen? Forced marriages aren't just stories from history books. They still happen, even in places where people assume they don't. And in this case, everything was planned meticulously. Her stepfather had legal guardianship over her, and in some states, with enough manipulation, paperwork could be twisted to make anything look legitimate. She had no money, no outside support, and no one to turn to. Every attempt to escape had been crushed before it could even begin. Then there was her so-called husband. He wasn't a stranger, but he wasn't someone she would have ever chosen. Reports suggest he was much older, a man with questionable intentions. Some say he was promised something in return, money, power, or even the guarantee of a submissive wife. Others believe he was just another pawn in her stepfather's twisted game. This was more than just control, it was ownership. And on that day, with rings exchanged and papers signed, she became his property. What happened next? That night she was expected to play the role of a devoted wife. But she wasn't a wife. She was a victim. Her fear wasn't just emotional, it was physical. There were reports, whispers of abuse, of things she was forced to endure behind closed doors. She had no voice, no rights, and no way out. She had spent her entire life being controlled, but this was something else. This was imprisonment, and yet her stepfather acted as if he had done her a favor. In his eyes, he had secured her future. But secured from what? From making her own choices. From living a life she actually wanted. This wasn't love, this wasn't family, this was a crime. And the worst part, no one was coming to save her, but she wasn't going to give up. She had one last fight left in her. And when she finally made a move to escape, everything took a turn that no one saw coming. For years, she lived in silence. Every day was a battle, every night a nightmare. But the truth, the real truth, was even darker than anyone could have imagined. She wasn't just trapped in a forced marriage. She was trapped in a carefully constructed web of abuse, manipulation, and greed. Her stepfather had orchestrated everything, but why? Why would a man force his stepdaughter into a marriage she didn't want? The answer was horrifying. It wasn't just about control, it was about money. Through legal loopholes and coercion, he had managed to ensure that marrying her off would secure financial benefits for himself. Some reports suggest there were inheritance stakes, while others hint at business dealings that required her to be legally bound to a certain family. In some cases, forced marriages are a way to settle debts, to form alliances, or even to secure immigration benefits. But in this case, the motive was even more sinister. No. Her husband wasn't just an unwilling participant. He was in on it. He knew she didn't want to marry him. He knew she was terrified. And yet he went along with it. But why? Some say he was promised a cut of the money. Others believe he was looking for a wife who wouldn't question him, who wouldn't fight back. But what he didn't expect was that she would fight back. Behind closed doors, she had been gathering evidence, every conversation, every threat, every moment of abuse. She recorded it. She had been planning an escape, but more than that, she wanted to expose them. She wasn't just going to run, she was going to bring them down. But just as she was about to make her move, something went terribly wrong. One night, she was found unconscious. The initial reports claimed it was a suicide attempt, but the details didn't add up. How could someone so determined to fight back suddenly give up? Why were there inconsistencies in the crime scene reports? And then, the biggest shock of all, her stepfather and husband didn't seem surprised. They didn't mourn. They didn't show concern. In fact, it almost seemed like they had been expecting this to happen. That's when investigators started looking deeper. Her stepfather's financial transactions revealed shocking details. Large sums of money had been moved just days before she was found. A life insurance policy had been updated. And most disturbingly, witnesses reported he had been overheard saying she was becoming a problem that needed to be handled. But was this a failed escape attempt? A staged suicide? Or something even worse? Murder. The truth was finally beginning to surface, and what investigators were about to uncover would change everything. This was it. The moment where everything came crashing down. For years, she had been controlled, silenced, and forced to live a life that wasn't hers. But people can only endure so much before they break. Her stepfather thought he had her completely under control. He made sure she was isolated, that she had no one to turn to. He made her feel powerless. But what he didn't know was that she had been secretly fighting back. She had been keeping a hidden journal, documenting every threat, every act of violence, every forced decision. She had stored voice recordings of the abuse. She had even reached out to an old friend, sending disturbing messages about how she feared for her life. But then, something snapped. One night, after a heated argument, neighbors reported hearing shouting and screaming coming from the house, something about her refusing to obey. Witnesses say they heard a loud crash, and then silence. The next morning she was nowhere to be seen. Her husband claimed she had run away. Her stepfather played the part of the worried parent, telling police that she was troubled and had probably left on her own. But there was one problem. Her personal belongings were still inside the house. Her phone, her ID, even the cash she had saved up, all untouched. And then there was the blood. Investigators found small traces of blood on the bedroom floor, barely visible but enough to raise suspicions. It was quickly dismissed as an old injury, but something wasn't right. The entire situation felt too convenient. Then came the biggest twist yet. Days later, a mysterious email was sent to one of her friends. It was from her account, but something felt off. The wording, the way it was written, it didn't sound like her at all. It was cold, emotionless, as if someone else had written it trying to cover up something. That's when authorities doubled down on their investigation. They checked surveillance footage from the neighborhood, and that's when they saw it, a shadowy figure dragging something heavy out of the house in the middle of the night. The footage was grainy, unclear, but one thing was obvious. This wasn't someone leaving on their own. And then came the final, undeniable clue, a shocking discovery that would expose everything. The moment the truth came to light, the entire courtroom fell into stunned silence. For years, her stepfather had manipulated, controlled, and terrorized her. He had forced her into a life she never wanted, pushing her to the edge of despair. And now he was finally on trial. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the disturbing details. They presented forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and damning digital records that painted a horrifying picture of what had happened behind closed doors. The emails, the hidden journal, the voice recordings, everything was exposed. But the biggest moment came when her husband, the man she was forced to marry, took the stand. At first, he defended himself, claiming he had no idea she was being abused. He insisted that she had married him willingly, but under pressure from the prosecution, his story started falling apart. And then he cracked. In a shocking twist, he admitted that he had known she never wanted to be with him. He confessed that her stepfather had pressured him into the marriage, warning him to keep her under control. He even revealed that on the night she disappeared, he had heard screaming, but was too afraid to intervene. The jury didn't take long to decide. Her stepfather was found guilty of multiple charges, including forced marriage, coercion, domestic abuse, and obstruction of justice. The judge's ruling was clear. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. As the verdict was read, some in the courtroom broke down in tears. Others sat in shocked disbelief. But for those who had fought for justice, it was a moment of victory. But was it enough? Her story wasn't just about one man's crime. It was about a system that had failed her. How many others had suffered the same fate, silenced and trapped by the very people meant to protect them? Her case sparked a movement, forcing new conversations. About forced marriages and hidden abuse, laws were re-examined. Survivors began to speak out, but the question remained: how many stories like hers would never be told? The trial was over. Justice had been served, or at least that's what the court ruling said. But the scars left behind? They would never fade. For the first time in years, she was free. No more fear, no more control. But freedom doesn't erase trauma. The years of suffering, the manipulation, the isolation, it had all left deep wounds that no sentence could undo. Her story had made headlines across the country. People were outraged, heartbroken, and in disbelief. How could something so horrific happen right under everyone's nose? How could the system allow a young woman to be sold into a marriage like a transaction? But her case wasn't just a tragic headline. It became a wake-up call. Advocacy groups pushed for stricter laws on forced marriages and coercion. Social workers were trained to identify hidden abuse. The government was forced to take a hard look at the loopholes that had allowed her stepfather to control her life. Survivors who had once been too afraid to speak started coming forward. Her courage gave them strength. She had endured the unimaginable, but by telling her story, she had given others a chance to escape their own nightmares. But what about her? Moving forward wasn't easy. The past haunted her. Some nights, she woke up screaming, trapped in memories of the man who had stolen her childhood. The fear didn't vanish overnight, but she refused to let it define her. With time, therapy, and the support of those who truly cared for her, she started rebuilding her life, not as a victim, but as a survivor, as a fighter. And now, her story is a warning, a reminder that these horrors don't just happen in the shadows. They happen in homes, in families, behind closed doors where no one is looking. But now, you know, and that's where change begins. If you or someone you know is trapped in a situation like this, speak up, reach out, help break the cycle, because no one deserves to suffer in silence. The question is, how many more will it take before we stop ignoring the signs?